Seattle had always been known for its rain, its gloomy skies, and the thin veil of mist that seemed to hover over the city year-round. For Annie, a lifelong resident, it was home. She loved the gray mornings and quiet evenings, the way the city lights danced on the water when the ferries came into dock. But lately there was something different about the mist. It started a week ago. People in the neighborhood began acting strange. Her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Wheeler, normally cheery and quick to chat about her garden, now barely acknowledged her. Instead, she stared blankly out of her window as if watching something no one else could see. The mailman, who had been on the route for years, now delivered mail in silence, his usual whistle replaced with hurried footsteps and a constant glance over his shoulder. Even downtown felt eerie. Streets once crowded with coffee drinkers and hurried commuters seemed emptier, quieter, and when people did speak, their voices were hushed, almost reverent. One evening, Annie's friend Mike called. "Have you seen the reports?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What reports?" "People are vanishing." She laughed nervously. "What are you talking about, Mike?" "I'm serious, Annie. They're going into the mist. And they don't come back. There are posts online. Videos even." Annie frowned. "Mike, are you okay? Maybe you're just spending too much time doom scrolling?" He sighed. "You'll see it yourself, Annie. Just don't go out after dark. Not with the mist rolling in." The warning stayed with her the next evening as she sat on the couch, staring out her window at the quiet street below. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the mist was thick, swirling under the streetlights in strange patterns. It almost looked alive. Annie shook her head, dismissing the thought. Mike's paranoia was starting to rub off on her. Just then she noticed movement on the sidewalk. A man was walking toward her building. He was wearing a suit, the kind you might see on a businessman heading home late. But something about him felt wrong. His steps were slow, almost robotic, and he didn't seem to notice the puddles he stepped in. Then, without warning, he stopped in the middle of the street. Annie leaned closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. She watched as the mist began to gather around the man's feet, then his legs, creeping upward until it enveloped his entire body. He didn't move. He didn't resist. And then he was gone. She didn't sleep that night. The image of the man disappearing into the mist replayed in her mind like a broken record. By morning, she convinced herself it had been a trick of the light or her imagination. But when she turned on the news, her stomach dropped. Authorities remain baffled by a recent string of disappearances throughout Seattle, the anchor said, her voice steady but uneasy. Witnesses report seeing individuals vanish without a trace during periods of heavy mist. Officials urge residents to remain indoors after dark and avoid isolated areas. Annie's heart raced. Mike had been right. Her phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Annie, did you see?" "I saw it last night," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You need to leave," he said. "I can't just leave my life, Mike." "You don't get it," he snapped. "It's not just random people. The mist is spreading. It's choosing." "Choosing? What does that even mean?" "I don't know, but everyone who vanishes has one thing in common. They all," he paused. "They all what?" "They all talked about it. Posted videos, warned people. It's like they're being silenced." And he froze. "You mean like what you're doing?" There was a long silence on the line. "Yeah," Mike said quietly. "Exactly like what I'm doing. Stay safe, Annie." The line went dead. Days passed and the city seemed to grow quieter. The usual hustle of Pike Place Market was subdued. Annie noticed fewer people on the streets, and those who were out avoided eye contact. The mist, too, seemed thicker than usual, curling around buildings and seeping into alleyways like a living thing. Then one night the knocking started. It was just after midnight. Annie had been lying in bed listening to the rain when she heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at her front door. She froze. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. No response. Annie grabbed her phone and dialed Mike's number. It went straight to voicemail. She backed away from the door as the knocking turned into pounding. "Go away," she shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. And then silence. She stood there, shaking, staring at the door. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, she crept to the window to see if whoever it was had left. The mist outside was thick, swirling in unnatural patterns under the streetlights. She thought she saw shapes moving within it, human figures, dozens of them just standing there, waiting. Annie's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's your turn." Her breath hitched as the mist outside began to press against the windows, like hands pressing through a curtain. The shapes moved closer, their outlines growing clearer. By morning, Annie's apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, no evidence she had been there at all. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter, a single unread message on the screen. "Welcome to the mist." Her disappearance was never solved. But those who lived in Seattle during the weeks that followed spoke of strange things. The increasing quiet, the way the mist seemed to creep closer to their homes at night. Some swore they heard voices in it, whispering their names. And as the months passed, the city seemed to grow emptier, quieter, until eventually even the streets themselves were silent.